Today I'm making a really robust end grain cutting board with custom inlay. I delayed building this piece since I had scored 3 trailer loads of gorgeous hardwoods, so I was a wee bit distracted. But finally, 'twas the week before Christmas. The giftees are both immunologists in microbiology, which I don't know what that means, but they do smart people things with DNA and stuff. So let's get right into building a genetically themed end grain cutting board. First, I'll make a beefy 2-inch thick end grain rock maple butcher block. Then we'll drill into the CNC Wood Inlay project, emblazoning that beautiful, twisting DNA pattern across the face. If I apply myself, I ought to get this done in time. Now we'll dig into some important tips along this process of making a maple end grain cutting board. To me, the way it turns out in the end has a lot to do with the original thickness of the lumber you're starting with. Since the boards are all sliced and then turned on end, the thickness of your original board determines how thick and chunky the height of the maple blocks will be. The stock width is not as important, since you'll be ripping the thick lumber to a few inches wide anyway to create that chunky appearance. So now with my stock selected, which in my case was 1.5 inches, I glued up these boards to get the thickness I wanted each chunk to be. Next tip I found, when cleaning those up, it's critical to get square corners. We don't want this to be trapezoidal at all. So when you glue several of these side by side, there's no gaps or cumulative bowing effect. If you'd like a video on truing up machines like the table saw to get a true 90-degree cut, let me know in the comments below. Once those are glued and planed, I've essentially got a face grain cutting board. Now it's time to cross-cut this board, and the thickness of these slices basically becomes the final thickness of the end grain cutting board. Pay attention to how these slices come off the saw, and open these slices up sort of in pairs end to end to keep a pleasing balanced pattern. Offset every other slice by 1 inch or so that the chunks create a sort of brick pattern, which is somewhat stronger than a straight checkerboard pattern, since the weakest parts of one row are immediately supported by the strongest parts of the adjacent rows. Glue this up as tight and flat as you possibly can, since sanding out an uneven slice here will cost you a lot of sanding, or so I've heard. I didn't have the guts to surface plane this after gluing, although a good helical head planer should slice right through this a very small amount at a time. So I went with my big green Ross Super Sander, though that left a rather rough finish with a belt to have on it. Subsequently, I sanded that for more time than shall be discussed. I left the funny offset sections protruding till the very end of the project. So here I'm done with everything except the inlay, and I still had like 4 days till Christmas. The custom wood inlay is really the wow factor of this piece, so let's get into that now. Since this build is a gift for 2 immunologists, I found a fitting design I liked, then used a program at vectormagic.com which made a super precise vector output of that image. I imported that into Vector Aspire, and it was ready for use with only a very few edits. I assigned the various colors in the graphic to 5 different wood species, and took some artistic license to remap some colors for greatest contrast. Then, it's time for some toolpath wizardry. In short, we're using a very steep angle V-bit to first design the female trapezoidal pockets, and then design almost exactly opposite male 3D puzzle pieces. I say almost because the height is slightly offset, so the male pieces don't quite bottom out in the pockets. That allows for the trapezoidal pieces to perfectly mate without fear that they bottom out before the perfect fit is achieved. At least that's the theory. Here we'll see how that works, and a couple ways you can mess that up. I'm skipping here many parameter settings and details that make all this happen, but comment if you're despairing and need some help in this process. For the rest of you watching this for fun, you're welcome. The time has come to dig into this carefully prepared end grain board. In each pass, I'm careful to only router out female sections that don't share borders with other pieces, so each male piece has every opportunity to nest in and be supported around all its edges while it's gluing up. The male pieces are designed with mirrored geometry, so the side that's facing up while cutting will actually be nested face down to make the final inlay. This way, using the same bit for both female and male counterparts makes for the perfect mating surface geometry when the male pieces are inverted. When done, the male pieces are freed from the stock with a scroll saw, then both male and female parts are detailed with an X-Acto knife. Every stray particle or hanging fiber is removed, so the pieces can mate flush. Then, I goop up the female side generously with waterproof glue, press and tap them together, and squeeze them together with my antique book press. I leave that to dry for at least several hours to overnight, unless I'm under unreasonable deadline. Once dryish, I can mow down the recently glued pieces, creating height clearance for the next pieces I'll clamp in, then router out a neighboring piece, even right up to the last piece inlaid, creating a wonderfully precise jigsaw effect. One way to mess up that effect is to misalign the cutting board and its jig. It'll get skewed a bit, even from stray wood shavings caught between itself and the indexing fence. The CNC itself is wonderfully precise and cuts wherever it's told. But if I move the board and its jig by some amount, the CNC won't know that, so the next puzzle piece is cut out of place by precisely that amount. I have come to consider such imperfections as character, because otherwise, time was ticking and I was getting dangerously close to finishing this with time to spare. It was then that I must have been punished by sins of Christmas past, because in saving out one of my female toolpaths, I evidently told my CNC to cut at a Z-axis height that was substantially lower than real life. That caused many unfortunate words to happen. So I manually reworked and widened these front DNA female pockets to incorporate much of the area I'd botched, and of course made new, slightly wider male pieces to fit those new spaces. Having placed the final inlay pieces and with everything dry, we can do a final CNC surfacing to bring everything down just a hair to ensure an even final cutting surface. At this point, I trimmed the block to final size, gave it some gentle round over edges, and sanded it down to 220. Then I shaped the handle recesses on an antique shaper. Then for the big reveal, a good soak in mineral oil. I love this magical moment when the color profiles of these various hardwoods just jump out at you. You can almost taste them. Next morning, I cleaned it all up and applied a wood wax protective coat just before the buzzer. Thanks for watching Wouldn't You Know It?